Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Jimmy Duster Music Channel for our bi-weekly show, A Week With. My friend, the Corrigible Luddite from the Western Coast, out Seattle way, joining us. And 1977 today. We're going to rank our top 5 albums from 1977. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel if you're joining us for the first time. We'd love to hear from you. Leave some comments. Tell us what your 5 favorite albums from 1977 are. And by the way, this is our favorites. You know, it's not necessarily the best. You know, arguably Fleetwood Mac Rumors is the best album of all time. You know, for production, musician, lyrically, and everything else. It's not going to appear on either one of our 5 favorite lists.
It's certainly the most popular record of 1977.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even close. And it's like, I think along with Dark Side of the Moon, it is the most coveted vintage record, those two, without any question. But yeah, but we're not doing the most popular. We're doing our favorites. And we're not doing the most critically acclaimed either on the other end of the spectrum. We're doing our favorites. So.
And these could change for us over time, too. You know, had you asked me 5 years ago, yeah, Rumors probably would have been number 1 on my list, or close to my number 1, which I'll talk about tonight. So, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
I'll go ahead and go first.
I'll go first tonight. How's that?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. I got some stuff from about 1977 I can start with here. So. Go over 1977.
Okay.
Right. Jimmy Carter became president in 1977. Was elected in 76. In January, Apple Computer was incorporated in January of that year. Super Bowl 11, the Raiders beat the Vikings 32-14. We had the Summer of Sam that year.
Yeah.
New York City with the blackout. We had the 77 blizzard that affected a lot of us. I know you were living in central Ohio at the time, and we had a couple extra days off school for that.
Were you in central Ohio then?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that vividly.
Yeah,
sure.
Avenue Elementary. Space Shuttle Enterprise gave its maiden flight in 1977. Let's see, hockey that year would have been the Canadiens sweeping the Bruins in 4 games for the Stanley Cup. Let's see, what else here? Elvis Presley performs his final concert in 1977. Elvis Presley passed away in 1977.
It's funny, when I was 8 or 9 years old, I never heard anything, the Son of Sam, when I was younger. It was just something that I heard about later teen years.
Zeppelin played their last U.S. concert that year.
Who played their last U.S. concert that year?
Led Zeppelin.
Oh, okay.
In 1977. So a lot of interesting stuff in 77. All right, let's get on to the music. It's 1977 here. You ready?
Do it.
Saturday Night Fever, another popular one we didn't mention yet. So, along with Rumors, probably the 2 most popular records of the year.
Rumors, though.
May or may not be on our list. We'll have to wait and see. So, my number 5. This was a tough year for me. It really was. Once I started seeing some of the albums, and there was probably 30 albums that could have made it to my top 5. Well, vying for the number 5 spot, I should say. My top 4, once I looked at it, were pretty much set in stone for most of the week. And the hard part for me was just coming up with number 5. And it came down to Queen's News of the World, Grand Illusion by Styx, the Kansas album that we already talked about. Shoot, I got it right here. I can't think of the name of it. Point of No Return, that we talked about back in the first show we did. So, but it came down to really one album here. And those others are certainly going to be on my honorable mention list. But I, Robot, the Alan Parsons project, came in at number 5 for me. I've always been a fan of their stuff. just from a radio standpoint, what they play on the radio. And it's only been probably the last couple of years that I've delved a little deeper into some of their back catalog and just started listening to the other stuff. You know, the one album about Edgar Allan Poe and just a lot of different literature and sci-fi that they bring into a lot of their stuff, and really learn to appreciate their music. And in my opinion, I think iRobot's their finest work. And that's my number 5.
Okay, good choice. It's a pretty good record. It's not on my honorable mentions, but they're very good musically. There's no question that Alan Parsons are phenomenal musicians. My number 5 was a bit of surprise. I happen to love his solo work. I knew this would at least be an honorable mention, but when I went back and listened to some of the other records that I was considering, I mean, my top 3 were very clear. It was 4 through 7 that, like, the first 2 honorable mentions out, and 4 and 5 that were tough. But number 5, I'm actually going to go with Peter Gabriel's self-titled. It's his first solo record when he left Genesis. It's often called Car. This is actually a UK copy, which I got for like $10, which is a pretty good deal. It's not an expensive record, really, but anytime you see UK on something, the price automatically seems to go up $10. But yeah, I love this record. And boy, he's a great songwriter. You still hear a few elements of what he was doing on Genesis in this, but you really hear now how great, kind of a conventional songwriter he is. Here Comes the Flood. What a beautiful song. I will say that I love the original version, but the version on Robert Fripp's Exposure a couple years later is actually even better, in my opinion. But the first one, the genesis of that one, no pun intended, occurred on the self-titled Gabriel album in 1977. Here Comes the Flood is an amazingly written song, highly poetic. Also, of course, you've got Modern Love on here, and the one that everyone knows, which is one of my favorite standalone songs of all time, and that is Salisbury Hill. What a deep song. Just loaded with depth. Interestingly, I know you like Alice Cooper. His guitar player, is it Dick Wagner, played on a lot of these songs. Robert Fripp also played on a few of these songs. So, yeah, this record, while not a masterpiece like his third record and his fourth record from 1982, it's a solid 9 out of 10 for me, and it's my number 5, Peter Gabriel's debut.
Good choice. Had that on my honorable mentions. So, okay, number 4. I knew this one would come on here somewhere. It's my favorite album by one of my 5 favorite bands. Judas Priest, the Sin After Sin album.
Oh wow, okay.
Sinner, Diamonds and Rust. I mean, what, covering Joan Baez singing a song written about Bob Dylan by a leather-clad heavy metal band. What could be better, right? Starbreaker, Last Rose of Summer, Let Us Pray, Call for the Priest, Raw Deal, Here Come the Tears, Dissident Aggressor. Just top to bottom, this is just a great album. All these are. I mean, all 5 that I have here are easily in my top 50 albums of all time.
Are there still some blues elements on that one, just out of curiosity? Because I heard Sad Wings of Destiny for the first time ever about 3 weeks ago, and I thought it was okay. But I did like the stuff from the early 80s, like Screaming for Vengeance, more, because you could still hear kind of it was not a ton, but you could hear a little bit of a blues element on that Sad Wings of Destiny that you don't hear on Screaming for Vengeance. It just sounds more metallic. So I was wondering if there's a hint of blues on that one.
Yes and no. Roger Glover helped with the production on this, and they fired him shortly into it and then brought him back. I don't know the whole story behind that. There is some of the blues influence, but you don't. I think this leans more towards the Screaming for Vengeance side of things than it does the Stained Class.
Sad Wings of Destiny remind me a lot of Deep Purple. A lot. A little bit heavier, but
this album to me has their best drumming on it. I'm a huge Les Binks fan, who's not on this album, incidentally, But this is the one and only album that Simon Phillips did with them. They brought Simon Phillips in to play the drums, and I think this is their best drum album.
Okay.
This one, and just great solos all around. I mean, the whole guitar duo thing. KK was the more sort of circus performer type of guitar player and a little more blues rooted. And then Glenn was the more technically proficient, almost coming from the jazz side of things. And just to hear the interplay on songs like Sinner and some of the other songs in this album, the whole guitar interplay, it's always fascinated me with that album. So that's my number 4, Judas Priest, Sin After Sin.
Great pick. Legendary band. My number 4, I'm going with a band that we actually covered their 70s material about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I'm going my number 4, I'm going Rush, A Farewell to Kings. This is not my favorite 70s Rush album. That's Hemispheres, the one that follows it, but this record's a 9 out of 10. It was, at the end of the day, the twin epics of Cygnus X1 and Xanadu were too much for my 2 honorable mentions. Let's put it to you that way. I'm not the biggest fan of Closer to the Heart. I think I mentioned that. I'm not really that keen on that song. I do like the title track a lot as well, but I just kind of want to listen to those twin epics, Xanadu and Cygnus X1. They're incredible songs. Cygnus X1 is probably one of my 10 favorite Rush tracks of all time. And it's just great musicianship. They're starting to really stretch themselves here. They're going to stretch themselves even more on the next one, but this is a great record and definitely a 9 out of 10 for me. So I'm going number 4, Rush, A Farewell to Kings.
Yeah, great choice. And I struggled with leaving that out of my top 5 as well. It was one of those in contention for top 5. And really it came down to the only reason I did leave it out of my top 5 is because we just talked about it a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and
it's a fantastic album.
I actually had Hemispheres above it, which I think A Farewell to Kings for me is a 9 out of 10. The 3 masterpieces for me are the ones coming up. Hemispheres for me is their 70s masterpiece, not A Farewell to Kings or 2112. But I definitely think A Farewell to Kings is stronger than 2112 to my ears. So, all right.
All right, back to me for number 3. Album has been just a huge influence on me personally for a long time. When I first got into jazz, it was one of the first albums I ever remembered hearing. Obviously, it's more of a fusion album than a jazz album, but just have wanted this on vinyl for so long, and just picked it up here not too long ago. Place I bought it from sent me a nice note thanking me for the order. He bought it 45 years ago new, enjoyed it, and took care of it. Hoped I enjoyed it, and of course I have. Heavy Weather by Weather Report.
Oh yeah,
Jaco Pastorius. You could stop right there, and it'd be a great album. Joe Zawinul, Acuna, Wayne Shorter, Pastorius. Just the whole lineup on this album is just some of jazz's greatest performers. From Wayne Shorter's saxophone to Joe Zawinul on the keys, and Jaco just holding down. Jaco was the world's first lead bass player.
Yeah, he's pretty incredible.
There's nobody like him on the planet that plays bass the way Jaco does.
And he plays on one of my honorable mentions that I'll get to later. But
okay.
So yeah, he's an incredible bass player for sure.
That was my number 3, one of my introductions to jazz and jazz fusion, Heavy Weather.
Okay. My final 3 are albums that you just, the first 2 are album listens without any question. I'm talking about the Gabriel record and the Rush record, but you can maybe skip around on those 2 a little bit. Not the last 3. The last 3 are album listens. My number 3, I'm going with Pink Floyd Animals. I can't even tell you the name of a song on this record right now. It's just a record that you listen to start to finish and soak it in. Now, with that being said, it's not one of my 3 or 4 favorite Pink Floyd records, which shows how strong their catalog is, because this is a masterpiece, folks. It doesn't have the ethereal vibes that you get on Dark Side of the Moon or, say, Metal earlier. This is their progressive rock record. okay. I don't consider Pink Floyd a progressive rock band, but this is the one record in their catalog that could be deemed progressive rock. It's also a quite vitriolic record. It's a scathing attack. I don't want to say attack. It's a scathing critique of a lot of things that we hold near and dear, courtesy Roger Waters' vision. The musicianship on this record is phenomenal. It's arguably David Gilmour's finest moment as a guitar player, top to bottom. I don't know how well those guys were getting along at this point, but it's a concept album. If anyone hasn't listened to it, he basically flips George Orwell's Animal Farm, turns it around, and takes it in a way that he deems, applicable, I guess, for lack of a better word. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, it's an incredible listen, and it makes you think. The best music often makes you think. This record will make you think, and a lot of it does, in my opinion, relate to what's going on in our world today. Musicianship's fabulous, and I think it's definitely a 10 out of 10. Animals. It's my number 3.
Well, interestingly enough, my number 2 album.
Did you get is that the new remix?
This is the 2018 remix.
Oh, I was going to ask you. I didn't mention that, but I know that there's a lot of discussion about the sound quality. And
well, it's one of those that I didn't know needed to be remixed until I heard it remixed. And at least to my ears, you pick up. I noticed a lot more of Rick's keyboard playing on this time. And unlike you, this is my favorite Pink Floyd album.
Wow. Okay.
I like this better than, just slightly better than Metal, and a little bit better than Dark Side and Wish You Were Here, and a lot better than The Wall.
It's a lot of people's favorite, and the thing about it that I got to be in the mood to listen to it, because let's just say what we want to say about it. It's a pretty pessimistic record. Yeah,
it is.
And
so is Dark Side. And
yeah, but this is pessimistic in a different way.
Yeah.
This is, I mentioned that this is the only record in their catalog. I would never call Dark Side or Wish You Were Here or The Wall or any of the stuff that earlier, like Metal and before, I would never call any of it progressive rock. This is the one record that I think is progressive rock. However, it's probably more punk rock than a lot of punk rock that was going on around the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, it is an angry, angry record. And he's really critiquing things going on in society, and it is still applicable today. I think it transcends politics. And I think it's also, you can look at it as kind of a take on herd mentality in a lot of ways as well. So I don't know. I don't necessarily connect to it.
Yeah.
But I understand it. I do understand where he's coming from on this, and I appreciate the depth and the art and the thought. So that's why it's my number 3. Plus, Gilmour's guitar is on fire on this record.
Yeah, I agree. So, yep, you just did my review for me.
Sorry, man. I didn't mean it.
But I agree with you 100%. I think this is their most progressive album.
For sure.
You hear bits of the progressive stuff creeping in on a lot of their other stuff, but yeah, just from a pure progressive standpoint, Animals is, and I think that's why it's my favorite album of their catalog.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece. I think Pink Floyd has 6 masterpieces. I mean, more than, well, Bowie and an artist I'm not going to mention today. They have, like, yeah. I can't think of many bands that have more than 5 masterpieces. Pink Floyd and David Bowie there are a couple of them.
All right, let's hear your number 2.
My number 2. We have to go to CD on this one. This is a great album listen. And when we did the 1987 review, I took some criticism for Dr. Kelly on my Depeche Mode pick, my number 3 pick. But this is the, let's just say, it's Kraftwerk, Trans-Europe Express. This is one of the most influential records of all time. It can't even be, it's not just been influential on pop music, rock music, dance music, electronic music, what people call post-punk. I hate the term post-punk. I can't stand it. But what people call post-punk, I mean, just massively influential record. And the songs are so good. They're not catchy, but they stick with you, right? So that's just, well, first of all, Hall of Mirrors is on here, the Hall of Mirrors. And there is a cover version that comes about 10 years later that I like more. But this was the origin of that cover. And this version of the Hall of Mirrors is so creepy. I mean, it is so creepy. I mean, there's no question that Kraftwerk had a big influence on John Carpenter as well. But we just have to look at whoever they influenced. They influenced David Bowie. They influenced The Cure. They influenced Susie and the Banshees. They influenced Joy Division. All that stuff that came out of the, late 70s in the UK that followed the Sex Pistols. Kraftwerk had an enormous influence on all of it. Then we get into like hip hop, right? In the US in the late 70s, early 80s, massive influence on hip hop. So their influence cannot be overstated, but 3 great songs on this, The Hall of Mirrors, which is so creepy, so robotic. Also metal on metal, but more than any of them, the title track. Everyone knows the title track. It's anthemic, okay? Trans Europe Express. I think bands probably in the late 70s would go out to it to warm up. But massively Trans Europe Express.
Okay.
They have another really influential album as well, The Man Machine, the one that follows this up, and Computer World to a lesser degree. But I think this is the Kraftwerk record. Like Animals, it's definitely a masterpiece, 10 out of 10, and one of the 3 most influential records on my list. So I'm going with Kraftwerk number 2.
Okay. All right, number 1. I don't throw masterpiece around loosely. This is the one album that I believe is a masterpiece, and I know you're going to hate me for it. We just talked about your feelings about Steely Dan before.
I can't connect with them, dude. I get the musicianship. I hear it. I know they're great musicians, but I just can't. I don't feel any emotional vibes from the music.
Yeah, and to me, this album is it's an album list, and it's a 10 out of 10. And I don't think you've ever heard me on this since we started this show refer to any album as a 10 out of 10 of yet. So, but Black Cow, Asia, Deacon Blues, Peg, Home at Last, I Got the News, Josie. So it's got some of their hits on it. It's got some of their deeper tracks. Not a bad song on it, in my opinion. It's just the musicians that they used, including Mr. Larry Carlton, who plays guitar on a lot of the album, and is just a fantastic emotional feel type of player that there's no comparison in my book to Larry Carlton. And I can't even remember all the musicians that played on this. I'm sure the Procaros were on it at some point.
Well,
and everybody came into the studio for them. And the one, I think, was it Cornelius Bumpus on the bass when he was trying to do some thump bass technique, and Walter Becker didn't care for that, and he turned and played it, and then Walter Becker's like, yeah, play what you were just playing on this track. And they probably weren't the easiest guys to work with in the studio. They'd have 45 different guitar players come in and lay down a solo and pick the one they liked. But I think that adds to some of the genius of it, the production quality that went into it, and everything else. And I've studied their whole catalog endless number of times, and to me, that's just my favorite of their stuff.
Do you know how we're not going to discuss this on air, but you know how they took their name, right?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make
sure. William Rice Burroughs novel.
Yeah, Naked Lunch, right?
Naked Lunch.
Yes, okay. We'll leave that for the viewers to figure out.
Yeah, pretty well known.
I always thought that was interesting. Oh, that's how they took their name. When I read the book years ago.
That's where a lot of their lyrics come from. Literature and references to things that are maybe like slang from something, and it's just everything's almost a farce of itself. They tried to steer clear of all stereotypes and real tongue-in-cheek humor with their stuff, with their lyrics. And I don't know, I could go on and on about them.
I remember when I read Naked Lunch, I'm like, oh, And this was probably like 2003 or I don't know, years ago, because it's like a montage of visions more than anything
Yeah.
else. It's a chaotic artist just writing down,
Was it William Rice Burroughs?
Yeah, William S. Burroughs.
William S. Burroughs. Rice Burroughs
Yeah.
wrote Tarzan, didn't he?
Yes, I don't know. I've never read Tarzan, but I've certainly have read Naked Lunch 2 or 3 times. I don't need to read it anymore.
William S. Burroughs.
William S. Burroughs, yeah, the one that everyone looked up to in the beatnik generation, like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. These guys, they all looked up to Burroughs. He was like the intellectual of the group.
All right, let's hear your number one and finish up with some of your honorable mentions. I want to try and wrap up here in the next 5 minutes or so. So
number one, David Bowie, Low.
Good choice.
Nothing else it could be. The Peter Gabriel and Rush records are 9 out of 10s. My last two are both masterpieces. The Pink Floyd record and the Kraftwerk record are both 10 out of 10, both masterpieces. But this one, for me, is an 11 out of 10. This record is a work of genius. It actually took some influence from Kraftwerk, predating Trans-Europe Express. It's really, how do I explain this record? It's a bunch of art fragments put together, kind of like William S. Burroughs on Naked Lunch, except it's music. And it does contain my second favorite Bowie single of all time, and that is Sound and Vision. The only single by Bowie that I love more, and I love a lot of his singles, but the only one that I love more is Ashes to Ashes on Scary Monsters. But Sound and Vision is a beautiful song. Big influence on Joy Division. You could hear that kind of the atmospheric lift of those keyboards. Joy Division was very inspired by that. But some other great songs on here before the instrumental parts, which are really what make this unique. But I love Breaking Glass. I also love Always Crashing in the Same Car. Then we get to the instrumentals, okay? Some of them, and this is where Brian Eno of Roxy Music fame comes into play. While Roxy Music was becoming more mainstream after 1975, David Bowie was becoming more avant-garde. So that was kind of the difference there. But some of these instrumentals are just incredible. A New Career in a New Town. And also, I can't pronounce this, Warsazawa. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. Warsazawa is brilliant. And more than all of them, Subterraneans. My favorite of the instrumentals. And, Eno is here in full force. Bowie has a magnificent saxophone solo on this song as well. This will be a challenging listen for someone who's never heard this period of David Bowie, but this just shows his diversity as an artist, and probably more than any album, this shows how much of a great artist David Bowie was. It's probably my second favorite Bowie record, and it's an 11 out of 10. Number one, Low, David Bowie.
Which Bowie era is that considered? Is that part of the Thin White Duke era?
No, this is the Berlin Trilogy. That's what they call it, even though Lodger doesn't really sound like Low in one of my honorable mentions, which is coming up. Because David Bowie had a very prolific 1977. Let's just say he maybe had the most prolific year of any recording artist, major recording artist ever. Not only did he do Low, my number one, he also has another album coming up on my honorable mentions. That's his. And he produced 2 Iggy Pop records, not 1, 2. The Idiot.
Let's hear your honorable mentions while we're at it. So.
Okay, let's do it. Got a bunch. Joni Mitchell, Don Juan's Reckless Daughter. Excellent listen. Never heard it before. Listened to it. I thought it was fantastic. Television Marquee Moon. This is a record that I love the musicianship on, but I really don't love the vocals. But I like Tom Verlaine's guitar work a lot. This is kind of a bridge between the Velvet Underground and Sonic Youth, this band. Okay, to kind of describe their sound. Parliament. Funkin' Teleki versus the Placebo Syndrome. I thought it was great. Honorable mention. Yeah, Bob Marley, Exodus has to be an honorable mention. Iggy Pop, Lust for Life, produced by David Bowie, definitely an honorable mention. Fleetwood Mac Rumors, overplayed, but I do love Gold Dust Woman and Dreams. As much as it's played, it's a great song. I'll put that as an honorable mention. And lastly, David Bowie Heroes. His second record from the year with the epic title track, but I do think Low is the better of the 2 records, but Heroes is an honorable mention.
Great choices. Great job. Got a few honorable mentions here that weren't mentioned. Rumors, of course, we talked about that earlier. Street Survivors, the Leonard Skinner album. Just a prolific catalog, and this was the last one before the plane crash that took the lives and affected them all, certainly. Slow Hand, Eric Clapton. Farewell to Kings, ahead of my list. You had that. Running on Empty, Jackson Browne. Grand Illusion by Styx. News of the World by Queen. Bat Out of Hell. Meatloaf, another huge album that year. Foreigner's debut. Couple that I have here. Maybe the most underrated Aerosmith album, Draw the Line. I love that album. You could just feel the tension starting to build between them, and sort of like Rumors. You can just feel the tension there. Kansas, Point of No Return, I mentioned earlier. Maybe my favorite Scorpions album, Taken by Force, with Yuli John Roth on guitar. Spectres, Blue Oyster Cult.
Oh, that's a very good record. I Love the Night. I Love the Night on there. Well, yeah. Godzilla. Of course, Godzilla's on there, but I Love the Night. That's a great track.
Yeah, that is a good song. And last but not least, Out of the Blue by ELO.
I actually neglected two honorable mentions, and I need to mention them real quick because they were my top two honorable mentions, Jim. So I got to mention. They're the two right on the outside that Peter Gabriel and Rush beat out for the 4 and 5 slot. One was Queen, News of the World. That probably is my top honorable mention. And, this was one of the records that got me into music, period. Yep, it's a 9 out of 10. I just, it's hard to beat Cygnus X1 and Xanadu. And that's Salisbury Hill and Here Comes the Flood. But great record, 9 out of 10. The other one is the Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bullocks.
Oh, yeah.
Just based upon influence, it needs to be mentioned. I'm not the biggest Sex Pistols fan in the world. They're a one and done. That record for me is a lot like Guns N' Roses' Appetite or Nirvana Nevermind. It had to happen, folks. It had to happen. I mean, Emerson, Lake and Palmer was getting a little out there, maybe a little bit too florid and bombastic. It had to happen. Yeah. And they did it. It was a one and done. I do like God Save the Queen. It's a great song. And, they also spawned my favorite vocalist of all time, who would be nothing like them within a year and a half, but she does come from the scene. So I'm thankful to Malcolm McLaren for that. The Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bullocks, is an honorable mention. Yeah,
that News of the World album, I remember buying that and the Grand Illusion at the same time with my saved up allowance money. Two of the first records I ever bought. And I just remember listening to those two beginning to end all the time. So love both those albums. Don't own either one today on physical media. So I need to pick those up.
Real quick story, side note. It's funny because my top two honorable mentions were Queen and the Sex Pistols, who are absolutely nothing alike, obviously. You can't get any further apart. Other than they both have loud guitars. But I think they shared the same recording studio around the time that Nevermind the Bullocks and News of the World were made. And I think that Sid Vicious and Freddie Mercury kind of got into it, from what I understand.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think so. I think Freddie held his own. But, I don't know much about the story, but I think it's kind of rock and roll lore, that they didn't really like each other very much. So they're coming from different places at the time.
Interesting. Well, folks, thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed what you heard. Hopefully you heard something on our list that maybe you haven't heard before and decided to go out and explore, because that's really what this is all about. Why the two of us do this, and our friend Dr. Kelly, when we have him on, is just, maybe to turn some listeners on to some things they hadn't heard before, or they think, oh, I remember that record. I need to go back and reinvestigate that. So make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. Comment below. We'd love to hear from you and hear what your 5 favorites from the year are. Thank you, and good night, everyone.
Thanks for watching.